with Sir Win as part of his public inquiry. Okay, so Sir Win, do you want just to have a quick word before we get going?
Yes, just really to reinforce the thanks that I know you've already received from Mr. Norris and from the Secretariat team. I am extremely grateful to you for participating in this way. It's not a formal forum like giving evidence might be thought to be, but nonetheless, you are in the public eye. And so I appreciate that it's an effort for anyone to put themselves in that position. So I'm very grateful to you all for doing it this afternoon. And my task is to listen. And for the most part, that is what I'll do, though occasionally you may hear my voice. So over to you, Jerome.
Thank you, Sir Win. So I'd like to start perhaps with you, Gary, if that's okay, just to tell us a little bit about yourself so that Sir Win knows who you are and where you are. And also, if you could just share with us a little bit about why you've joined us today, why you wanted to share your story with Sir Win.
Yeah, my name's Gary Brown. I left school at 15 with no qualifications. I first off trained as a butcher, but I wasn't very satisfied with that. So at 20, I retrained as a paint sprayer. And for 23 years, I worked for the Ministry of Defence, stroke Vickers Defence Systems, painting armoured fighting vehicles. We used everything to buy our post office, redundancy and everything, so we had nothing to spare when we did move in there. We moved from Leeds to a little village called Rawcliffe in East Yorkshire.
Okay. And when did that you first got involved with the post office then, Gary?
It was August 2000 we moved in. Right. So we started purchasing it or trying to buy it in the February.
Mm-hmm. And are you still there now?
In Rawcliffe, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 100 metres down the road from the old post office.
Right. But you don't run the post office anymore then?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And what would you say has brought you here today to share your story?
I just want to give my version of events as best as I can, that's all. To let Sir Win know how we've been affected by it all.
Right, thank you. That's very clear. Thank you, Gary. Sandy, could I come to you and just for you to tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Sandy Brocklehurst. Before taking on a post office, my career was retail and customer service. Mm-hmm. We took our first post office on in November 1988, which was a village post office. And I'd been there a couple of years when I became the branch secretary of the Taunton branch of the Federation. And a little while after that, I had a surprise phone call from the post office asking me if I would like a job with them as a retail line manager. And if I accepted the vacancy, they would cancel all the other interviews. And I thought this was a bit strange. My husband reckoned I'd been a thorn in the side of the post office for a while as a branch secretary. Anyway, cut a long story short, I turned that down and the post office said that I was wasting my talents in a small office. So with their encouragement, we sold the village post office and bought an ex-Crown post office with a mains contract in 1995. That's it really for now. The reason I've come here today mainly is I'd like Sir Win to hear some of the sort of side effects of how POID dealt with people, because I'd sat in on quite a few interviews. And I think that's important for him to know about that. And also my views on the Federation of Sub Postmasters.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure you'll get a chance to. So POID being the investigative, yeah. Okay, thank you. And so are you still living in the area where you were in the post office then, Sandy?
We're living in the next town to where our post office was, but we are now retired.
Okay, so a similar situation to Gary in that sense then, right, thank you. And finally, Tim, welcome. You want to introduce yourselves to us?
Hello, my name's Tim Boothman. I'm current postmaster at Chapel Enley Frith Post Office in High Peak, Derbyshire. I grew up on a Yorkshire Dales dairy farm and started to work for my mother and father when I left school. However, sadly, in 1995, my father died suddenly and left myself and mother to run the farm. We did round and about 3 years, and we just carried on. But it got to the point where I felt that I needed to do something for myself. And so we started to look round for a business for myself. My mother actually was, she wanted me to go through further education and go to university and actually get a profession such as an accountant or a lawyer or something along those lines. But at 29 years old, I felt that probably going back to school was a little bit too late. And I wanted to get my teeth into something, really. So as a bit of a compromise with my mother, she said, well, how about being a postmaster? That's an upstanding type of profession in the community, and you can have your own business at the same time. So we actually started to look round at post offices, and we travelled the length and breadth of the country. And we settled one actually near to where we lived, in Keighley. And that post office was Lowmore Post Office in Bradford. So we purchased that and I took over in September 1998. And we ran that post office until January 2005. And the post office that closed under, I think it was the Urban Network Reinvention Programme. So I was paid out a sum of compensation, and I used that compensation to purchase Chapel on the Frith Post Office, where I am now and still currently. Mm-hmm. And the main purpose of coming to the inquiry really is 24 years of experience of running a post office and dealing with the post office. And I believe that I've got quite a number of things that would be helpful to the inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Well, thank you all for that nice, clear explanations. So I'd like to take you back to the time when you were sort of first coming into the role in the post office. Just interested to hear about kind of your feelings and expectations at that time. You know, what was in your mind and in your heart at those times? I'll start with you, Tim, as you're still on my screen. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about what was in your mind? Or your sense of expectation of what it would be like?
My sense of expectation was I knew it was going to be hard work. And I was no stranger to that, growing up on a farm. Mm-hmm. My expectations were that having a post office would provide me with a good level of income. It would form a basis, really, you know, to get married, start a family, that kind of thing. And a good, what I believed was a good, secure something, you know, like it's not really a job. It's only a business that would be secure. It had a secure future. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you know, I was always sort of led to believe that the post office had a good brand and they could be trusted. They had integrity. So it felt like a very good career move for a youngish 29-year-old.
Right, great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah. So how about you, Sandy? What was your sort of expectation and emotions when you first started?
Well, we bought a village shop. It didn't have a post office. The post office was in another small village shop in the same village. When the sub-postmaster handed in his notice and was going to retire, in those days, the post office advertised the vacancies on a big board in the main post office. And my husband happened to see it, and we decided it'd be a good idea to try and get the post office into our business so that it would be more viable. And that's exactly what we did.
Okay. And how would you describe the person you were at that time, Sandy, in terms of your outlook?
I don't know. I've always been very optimistic. I was looking forward to a new challenge. I'd always worked in retail, and I'm a people person, so I was looking forward to it. Little bit of intrepidation, but it was basically paperwork and handing out money, which was nothing unusual for me. So I knew how to do that.
Right. Thank you. And Gary, what was your sort of state of mind when you first came into the game?
We planned to work up until retirement, 65 or thereabouts, and hand it over to our daughter. She's interested in things like that. But when we moved in, after a few weeks, we realised we were onto a winner, or we thought we was onto a winner. Our shop takings increased fivefold within months. So we were thinking about retiring early, maybe 55, and handing things over, but things changed completely. Everything was turned on its head. What happened? So, yeah, we'd have liked to stay there. I mean, we were that adamant we were going to stay there. We even buried my father's ashes in the garden. So, in a few years after that, everything went to pot.
Yeah. And as the same way I asked to Sandy, how would you describe the person that you were in terms of your outlook when you started?
I like to have a laugh and a joke then. My favourite day of the year was April Fool's Day. I like to play practical jokes, but not anymore. No, I'm a completely different person.
Right. Okay, thank you. So let's think about your first experiences of running the post office. And I mean, obviously we'll get into the horizon issues as well, but I'm just interested into how it started to pan out in those early days. So can I just check, all of you were started on a paper-based account ledger?
No, I didn't.
Did you not? No, you were on horizon, right? Okay, well, perhaps come back to you in a second. How about you? So, Sandy, do you want to sort of tell us about sort of those early days and how it sort of running the post office was, and just the progress of it?
It was a small village post office. It ran exceedingly well. I had a very good trainer. He was a counter clerk from the Crown Office, and I had a week's training with him. I think some of the customers stayed away knowing I was going to be trained. So he ended up having to grab things like a tin of baked beans and putting them on the scales and say, right, that's a parcel going to France, or that's going somewhere else. So that was quite good fun. He was with me for a week, and then he came back the week after to go through the balance. And no problem at all. Being such a small office, if I was tuppence out on balance night, I was looking for it on the floor. Oh, there it is. No problems whatsoever with that. When I moved to the mains post office in 1995, that was a different ball game. The post office deemed I didn't need any training because I'd already had a post office. But the office I took on had vehicle licensing, data post, all sorts of things I had never dealt with. And the staff knew more than I did, which seemed, a bit difficult. I was supposed to be the boss, and I was having to ask them. And so I had no training. I had to learn as I went along. And what made it worse was the post office took 25% of my remuneration in the first year to reflect the risk. I don't know whose risk that was. I think it was mine, not theirs. Yeah.
When you transitioned to the previously what had been a mains office?
It had been a mains office, yes. Well, it had been a Crown office, and then it was transferred to become a mains office, and then I took it on.
Yeah.
But the fact I had no training wasn't good. We'll talk about Horizon later, but the paper-based system worked very well, and we had minimal losses at the time. All ticked along quite nicely.
Okay. So picking up on what Sandy's saying there, Tim, how did you sort of feel prepared, and tell us a little bit about those early days of training or introductory times?
Yes, when I took over, I was very fortunate in the previous owner, Brian. He let me work in the post office a month before I took over. So I did round and about 4 weeks, and he just taught me everything really that he possibly could. There were two aspects to it really. I'd got to get used to the job, actually running a post office, and also I was starting up in business for myself. So not only did I have to sort of learn all accountancy and HR for staff and employing staff and all the legislation that goes with it, there were two aspects, and to be honest, it was quite overwhelming. The paper-based system was actually a complete nightmare to fathom and get my head around. My lawnmower was a very, very, very busy pension and allowance. We were doing something around and about 2,000 dockets per week of pension allowances, which was an incredible amount of money to be paying out, and also taking money back in through banking and bill payments. We also did quite a lot of postage. We were a 3-position counter, and those 3 positions were going flat out 5 days a week, and 2 of us could probably manage Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. To try and make things easier, it soon became apparent that there was actually a computer program called Richard Jackson. Now, Richard Jackson was a postmaster at the time, somewhere over in Rotherham, and he'd actually developed a computer program called Balancer, which you ran on just your normal PC. And I believe it was an MS-DOS program. And what you would do is all your paper dockets, whether they be pension allowance dockets or telephone dockets and things, you would go to the back and you would enter them. And at the end of the week, it would produce a cash account, as you would, instead of having to write the actual manual with figures. This would do it for you, and the post office accepted like a printout from it. What it also helped you do is on balance day, which was a Wednesday, you could start entering your bulk stock and cash long before you actually closed. So you would start entering all those figures. And so when you actually closed at, say, I think we closed at 1 o'clock or 12:30 on a Wednesdays, which was like a half day, you'd nearly done everything. And as soon as I went on that and got used to it, everything improved massively. And the sort of errors that came back, they used to, in them days, they used to call them error notices. And to be honest, you had the confidence that if you made a mistake, if you'd, for instance, the gyro in payments, some of the forms were badly laid out. And so a customer could bank cash and checks, but there'd be a grand total in a box. And a common mistake was for you to enter the grand total of cash and checks and not just the cash. So therefore you'd find yourself at the end of the day, quite a way out. Mm-hmm. If that happened, you always had the confidence that the post office would write to you and give that money back. And that was quite evident. And, I made loads of mistakes in those early days. But as soon as I went on Richard Jackson Balancer, it really cleaned everything up, and we were more efficient, more slick, and it just made the job easier. Right. I never actually did get my head round the manual, writing everything out by hand.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that. So that was all before Horizon, clearly. Yeah. So let's think about when things started to, particularly on the accounting side, started to go not as you would hope. So Gary, just to talk to us about your, when things started to go a bit wrong for you, accounts-wise.
Well, it was after about 2 years, I think, since we've been there. I mean, little bits were going missing, and sometimes it were over for a couple of years. But after that, it just seemed to escalate and nothing seemed to be coming back. It were all losses. We had this thing what the trainers told us to use for overs and unders. If you were over, you put money in it. When you were under, you took money out of it to put into the account system. But after a couple of years, there were nothing over. We were always under, and it seemed to get gradually worse and worse.
Okay. So in that, when would that have been? Those couple of years then?
In about 2002, 2003.
Right. Okay. So at that period, the 2 years that you just mentioned, what did you sort of attribute those errors to then? Or those? Pardon?
Myself.
Right.
I
Okay.
just thought it was me what wanted up to doing the job.
Right.
I often said to Maureen, my wife, and the assistant, what gave me the audacity to think I could run a post office? And I used to say often, because every week it seemed to be short.
Right.
And I checked everything, but there were nowhere I could find anything.
So if you take yourself back to that period, how did it feel? Because obviously Sir Win and I have never run a post office. How did it feel to be in that position of having those?
I was on edge all the time. When I was serving people, I was double checking myself just to see I hadn't made a mistake. And I did make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but not to the extent it were building up to. It would I was just feeling anxious all the time. I was in 14 years, and 12 of those years it was murder.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to what you did next in a moment, if that's all right, Gary.
Yeah, no problem.
Sandy, when did things start to, appear wrong for you, accounts-wise?
When Horizon went in about 2000, 2001, we started getting small errors. When I say small, 50, 60 pounds. And I was told that for an office of that size, that was quite normal. As time went on, we were fairly lucky, actually. I only had 2 unexplained losses over that period of time. But the machine would do weird things, and I lost faith in it, to be honest. On a Friday night, we would count all the cash, and it was always a Friday night that we did this particular thing. The girls will count all the cash. I'd enter it on Horizon, and it would come up that I was £360 short. So after the girls had gone home, I used to recount the money, and then my husband, who worked on the retail side of the shop, would come in. He'd recount the money, and then we'd recount it together. And every time it was £360 short, and I'd end up having a sleepless night worrying about this. And on the Saturday morning, I'd go in, operate the post office as usual, close up at 12:30, count the cash, and it was perfectly right. And that happened on more than one occasion. So I lost faith in Horizon. And being a branch secretary, I'd also started hearing of people having a few problems. So I was really worried that it could happen to us.
So how often were you getting? Was this every week or every balancing period, or how?
It was intermittent. It would come up one week and then it wouldn't happen again for a few weeks, but then it'd happen again. When it got to about the 3rd or 4th time, I just started ignoring it. I used to think, well, this has happened before and tomorrow it'll be right. But you'd still lie in bed worrying about, what happens if it isn't? And what happens if it had been 36,000 and not 360?
Mm-hmm.
It was a worry.
Okay.
And can you just try and put an approximate year when this sort of thing first started? We know that Horizon was installed, depending on your particular post office, around about 2000. So which year are we in now, do you think?
Probably 2000, and it was intermittent right the way through. 2004 onwards, really.
Okay, thanks.
It didn't happen every week. It would once in a while.
Right. Okay. Then. And as you said, it was enough to make you lose sleep. You mentioned at that time, right? Okay. So, Tim, how do these stories reflect what you were experiencing?
If you go back to when Horizon was actually installed, I would imagine in Lowmore in Bradford, round and about sometime the year 2000, we'd gone on a few training courses, and actually I was really looking forward to it because I thought it would probably revolutionise, you know, how we worked on a post office counter. And to an extent, it did. The main thing is on the day of installation, obviously engineers would install it, and you had to be close for that, obviously. But when it came to setting up, some sort of audit people and trainers would turn up, and they loaded everything onto the computer, and you had your FAD code and all your transactions. Somehow everything got migrated, and you'd set off. In hindsight, what I should have done, or probably should have been advised by the post office to set, I had 3 positions. They should have been set up as individual stock units. And instead, it was done as one big stock unit. So in other words, if somebody made a mistake, you hadn't got a clue who or where or how or at what time or anything. I mean, currently what I do, I've still got 3 positions in Chapel on the Frith. All of them's their own, in effect, their own small little post office. And they declare their own cash 3 times a day. And if a mistake's been made, right, you're going to know, and you don't have to look so far. And you can actually, to a point, remember who you've served and what you've served, because it's only, you know, like a short-term memory thing. But we carried on with this one big shared stock unit, and I didn't really know there was a function of having individual stock units. I knew that in the back office, the actual user interface, in other words, like the EPOS system to serve customers, was very, very good. The back office bit was just a mass of icons that meant nothing. The balance snapshot, if you print it out, which was in effect the equivalent of the ledger, like your cash account, was a great big long thin piece of paper that came out of the counter printer and was just gobbledygook. You know, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to say something, Zoe?
Well, I'll carry on if you.
I was going to ask, given you're describing the situation, I just wondered what sort of training and support or resource of any type all of you had to ensure that you had your Horizon working as it was intended to.
I believed it worked okay, and the reason for which is that I carried on with my Richard Jackson despite the fact I was on Horizon, and I did that for at least 2 years. You know, I was still very skeptical, because it seemed that there used to be this egg timer, a great big egg timer in the middle of the screen that used to spin for ages and ages and ages. And I used to think, why is it taking so long to work out a few figures? You know, why has it got, is it short of memory? Is it short of hard drive? Is it short of, I don't know. So I was always very skeptical, but to be honest, when you do your balance on a Wednesday afternoon, the Horizon figure always matched the Richard Jackson. So I'd no reason to believe there was any faults in the system, but there might have been. I don't know.
Okay. So Gary, what did you get in terms of specific support or training or resources to help you use and understand Horizon?
I had a really good trainer, Norma Beresford. I had her for just under 2 weeks, but it still wasn't long enough. The main business in our post office were pensions. So that's what we're doing most of the time. But once you got off that and Norma had left and you start to do something else, I ain't got a clue. I ain't got a clue what to do, apart from like gas bills, electric bills, the simple things. But I used to phone the help desk every day to try to get me through things. When like the stock unit said, I'd never even heard of them. I didn't know anything about them.
Right. So we literally ringing every day.
Oh yeah, yeah. I did a freedom of information about a year ago, and the post office have told me that I'd rung 54 times over 14 years. Now I estimate I rung 54 times in under a year. I had a customer come in the early days, and she said to me, "Do you phone the helpline a lot?" I said, "Yeah, why?" She said, "Oh, because my friend works on it." And she said that you're phoning every day. I thought, God, where's the Official Secrets Act? I thought they want to give things like that out. Yeah, so that's how often I was phoning.
Right.
I just didn't have a clue.
Right. Okay.
I would say it was about two years before I was reasonably confident.
Right. Okay. So Sandy, you mentioned the challenge of going to the bigger branch and working with staff and things. What was your sort of sense of how well prepared you were to run Horizon and to solve any problems or identify issues and things?
The training for Horizon was inadequate as far as I was concerned. We were shown how to sell a stamp and a few other bits and then given a manual, and we literally had to learn the job as we went along. That was it, really. The whole system was not user-friendly at all. It really wasn't. But we trundled on with it and managed it. On the odd occasion, we phoned the helpline, but they were completely hopeless. And in the end, I instructed my staff not to use the helpline under any circumstances because the information they gave was inadequate or totally wrong.
And when would that have been?
Fairly early on, probably within about the first year of Horizon going in. I told my staff not to use the help desk.
Right. Okay.
We worked. I mean, my staff had been in that office quite a while before I took it on, so they knew what they were doing. When Horizon went in, we helped each other with things. So if somebody didn't know something, one of the other staff did or I did. So we worked that way. So if a problem came up, we worked it out ourselves rather than ring the helpline, because I knew of these problems where sub-postmasters had phoned and the error doubled. And I didn't want that happening in my branch. So I just said to the staff, don't use them. Don't use them at all.
Right. So you had 3 terminals at that point, did you, in the branch?
We had 3.
Okay.
Well,
So,
3 on the counter and a back office one.
right. So imagine going back to that time, if something's going wrong, what would you advise me to do if I had a shortfall in my branch? What was the process?
Sort it out yourself.
But basically, that's what the helpline would tell you to do.
How would you? Okay, so you've told me. So I'm ringing you up and saying, okay, I'll sort it out myself. How do I do it? What's my first step to resolve a
very, very difficult, but to go through reams of paperwork wasn't easy. Once you got your head around the system, if you thought you had created an error, let's say of £100, you were probably looking for something on the system that was 50 that you'd put on the wrong side of the account, if you get my meaning, because it would double it. So you learn how to find discrepancies, but luckily we didn't have too many. I got very good staff, and I think the fact they didn't use a helpline was a great help. Yeah, we worked things out ourselves, but the Horizon accounting system was absolutely useless for a sub-postmaster. You couldn't find what you were looking for. You'd reel off a transactional log, which was like a long, little, narrow piece of toilet roll, if you like. And you could spend ages going through that and comparing it to other things and still not find the discrepancy. So if you ended up with a discrepancy, in order to carry on the next day, you had to make good the loss, or there was never any surplus, or put it into what was a suspense account, which deemed basically if you put it in there, you were going to pay it.
Yeah. So how often would you say were you having to make good the loss or to put it in the suspense account, Sandy?
The money used to come out of the retail business, so we made up the losses quite regularly. If it was a large amount, my husband used to record it. We've still got the paperwork here now. I had 2 what I consider fairly big losses, one of 600 and one of 400. and we paid that by cheque into the post office. We covered it, but we never got an error notice for that. So we just had to accept it. I think it sounds terrible, but I think we were fairly lucky in so much as our losses over 10 years were about £6,000.
Right.
So I'd given the post office 6,000, but some of those small mistakes were probably human error. Someone had sold a second-class book of stamps and given out a first class or something, so there'd be a small loss there. But on the whole, well, we were. I maintain we were fairly lucky.
Yeah. So if you exclude those human errors, what sort of sum were you thinking was attributable to Horizon errors?
The main ones came to over £1,000, but the rest of them were like £50, £100. I personally, because I have no faith in Horizon, I would attribute quite a lot of them. Anything other than a small amount, I would say, was Horizon generated.
Okay, so I'll go on to the other two in a moment. But so, did you never got to a point of being audited or investigated for any losses?
I wasn't. I was never investigated. Audited, yes. The auditors used to turn up when they knew I was going to be away at conference. Nearly every time they turned up, I wasn't going to be there.
Okay, I will come back to that in a moment then, if that's okay, Cindy. So if I could move across the room to you, Gary, can you just tell us about your sort of those experiences with discrepancies and where you thought they came from, and just sort of tell us the story of what happened?
The main ones, I'll just, for instance, we're £1,000 short. So when I were balancing, I phoned the helpline up, and they told me to do different things on the computer. I did it, and while they were still on the phone, it instantaneously doubled to £2,000. And that happened twice, from what I can remember. All the others, or most of the others, I just put it down to myself, not being able to do the job. That's how they made me feel. It made me feel that I just wasn't up to doing the job.
Okay, so you were describing before your very frequent calls to
Yeah.
Helpline. Were those predominantly about shortfalls, or were they about other operational issues as well?
Mostly operational issues to start with, but later on it was about money going missing and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so if we focus on the money going missing calls, how does it feel when you're ringing them and you see the screen doubling and so on?
Oh, it makes you feel sick. It really does make you feel sick, because you knew they didn't seem to know what they were doing themselves. They were just suggesting you to do things, but they couldn't put the finger on anything at all. So towards the end, I just stopped phoning. It was a complete and utter waste of my time, because you could be waiting an hour trying to get through.
Mm-hmm. And the way Tim described, he had the parallel IT system he was running. What did you have to help you resolve or understand the causes of the issues? Nothing
really. I used to do what the others used to and go through the till roll sort of thing, end of day. But as has been said, it was gobbledygook. You'd no way of finding out any losses really, apart from counting everything, which I used to do. My wife used to come and help me count everything, the stamps, everything. But it just wasn't enough. Just everything, whatever you did, there was nothing you could do to get it right. Not in my circumstances anyway. Right, okay. So you've talked about the helpline, all of you, I think, and what alternative sources of help or support did you have to try and get to the bottom of it? Well, I phoned my, I don't know what they call them, line manager or area manager. All the time we're there in 14 years, I think I had two. I saw the first lady twice. Mm-hmm. That would to tell me off one at times, because I put the lozenge up, a new lozenge and things like that. The second lady, Diane Hoyles, she was really nice, but she was no help at all. When I told her about the discrepancies, she said, well, if I do get the auditors to come in, they'll just close you down and you'll have to pay the money back. So I would do that anyway.
Right. And what sorts of amounts are you talking about here? And when was it?
Hundreds of pounds a week. She did get an auditor to come in, who was one of her friends, and it was off the record. And he spent nearly a week with me. He went through everything. Couldn't find anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah, it was just demoralising.
Right. And did you, just as I was saying, did it get escalated? Did you get investigated or?
Only when I called them in at the end.
Right.
In 2014, yeah.
Right, we'll come to that in a second then. So, Tim, you've heard what your colleagues are saying there about the helpline and the area manager and things. How does this match with your experience, would you say, of shortfalls in handling them?
Yes, the helpline really was very limited to what it could do. You'll know you may have had IT problems yourself with completely other system with completely, let's just say that you had a problem with some kind of program that did your accounting, and say if you ran QuickBooks up, you can actually press a button and put a code number in, and that operator at the other end can actually take control of your mouse and your computer and things. Now, I'm not saying that the post office should be given access to that, but there was actually no way of knowing from their perspective that the advice that there were, there's two things really, right? It's whether the operative at the other end of the phone understood what you were saying to them correctly, and you were understanding and pressing the right buttons at your end. Mm-hmm. So the operative couldn't have, there's no way, right, could the person at the helpline know if you'd followed their instructions exactly. And so there's a bit of ambiguity there, really. I've always steered very, very well clear of suspense account. And the reason for which, if you put an amount in suspense, but you put it on the wrong side, right, your error will double. Your actual, your discrepancy will double. And not only that, as time went on, transaction corrections used to come out, and these were like automatic transaction corrections, where not only would it correct the transaction you'd done incorrectly, but it would automatically remove that figure from the suspense account. Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, that you'd not entered the figure correctly or not put it on the right side of the suspense account, and they send a transaction corrections. If you get your head around it, yes, your error would double. So I've always stayed very, very well clear of using the suspense account. I mean, all these things, I was very sort of keen at the beginning. I loved it. I love the computer system so much that it soon became apparent from my retail line manager that they were being overwhelmed with problems. During the rollout, loads of people had loads of problems, and nobody really knew how to use it. And they actually offered me a job. I was given the title balance support officer, and they paid me an hourly rate, and they gave me mileage. And on a Wednesday afternoon, I'd finished mine and done for 1 o'clock, and I used to go out on a Wednesday afternoon, and I would support sometimes 3 other offices to balance on a Wednesday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And I can remember one of them. It was somewhere up in Huddersfield, and the gentleman had been there 30 years, I think. It could even be 40. And to expect him to start using this computer system without additional support was just ludicrous. And so I think I went there every single Wednesday afternoon for 6 weeks, among others. You know, I must have supported at least a dozen other branches before the post office kind of pulled the plug on it, when I actually felt that these people needed more support.
Right. So from your recollection of that, how much of those balancing problems were caused by Horizon, and how much were you able to deduce from what you were doing?
That's very difficult to say. I at that time was not aware that the Horizon system couldn't put 2 and 2 and make 4. I never particularly saw anything that would suggest that, you know, 2 and 2 make 5. But again, because you couldn't look into the back office, there's no way of accessing it, and there's no way of accessing it in a way that you could look easily at the figures. There's just no way of knowing. You'd got a screen in front of it, you couldn't see behind. You couldn't see the workings of how the system added up the figures.
Right. Okay. So in your personal case, Tim, how serious did the losses and discrepancies
Well,
grow?
in my own branch, we had quite a number of losses, but usually they were all round and about £20. Now, you know, you could attribute that to somebody giving the wrong change out. You've got to appreciate that in a post office, unlike a shop, if you work in a shop or a pub or any retail, you're just taking money in and that's it. It's all one way. In a post office, right? Sometimes you're giving money out and sometimes you're taking money in. You can soon get confused. And I've done it so many times myself. I've just, you know, you can just deposit money into somebody's account instead of paying it out, or vice versa. So you really needed to be right on the ball, and with a queue out down the street, you really needed to be, you know, on top of your game, and your staff as well.
Mm-hmm. So over the time you were there up until now, I guess, what sort of amount do you think you've had to put in to make up?
I think I've put probably round and about £3,000 or £4,000 if you added it all up. But to be honest, if I looked, when we tried to investigate that, and I would do with staff, usually, right, the most probable cause was user error, because we'd look through a transaction log, especially once I got on individual stock units, and we'd look, can you remember that customer? Oh yeah, sure. You know, it's very, very, very easy to say put £100 in somebody's account instead of 10, especially right when the double naught button is right next to the enter button. Your finger can soon catch that double naught button, and the post office keyboard, for instance, is not like your standard QWERTY keyboard. If you look at a standard QWERTY keyboard, it's a decimal point button next to the enter. You know, I've actually seen pictures of postmasters getting a knife and lifting that double naught key off, so they can't press it by accident.
Right.
Just bad design on the post office keyboard, to be honest. You know.
Yeah.
But to go back to your original point,
yeah,
I don't believe personally that I've ever had a problem with bugs and glitches in the Horizon systems that I've used. However, right, I've no way of knowing that. I might have had and not known.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't actually, in all probability, I think I'm one of the very lucky ones.
Okay, right. Thank you, Tim. So,
sorry, just before we go on, you mentioned carrying out an activity on a Wednesday afternoon, which I haven't heard very much about. In other words, you going out to assist other people, all right?
Yes.
Can you give me some idea for how long that continued?
I would say round and about 4 months. It's difficult. It's difficult to remember because, say, I was in Bradford. The rollout, they wouldn't just do Bradford all in 1 week. They would space it out. And usually the retail line manager, a very good gentleman called Peter Leskovac, I think he kind of realised that I was one of the ones that kind of got my head around it. And he would send me out and probably on and off for about a year.
And I take it that this was proximate in time to when Horizon was rolled out.
Yes. It were the offices I went to had just had it installed, and I usually went to them every week for around and about 6 weeks to a month. For 2 months. Or until they felt competent, after 3 weeks, they were fine. Yeah.
And then you hinted, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you did hint that this program or process may have come to an end a little too soon. And I just wanted to be clear that I've understood you about that. Do you think this sort of process should have carried on for longer or not?
I believe so. I think that they'd certainly not intended to do that right from the onset, the post office. It was, shall we say, a knee-jerk reaction after they'd rolled it out and realised that the retail line manager couldn't go around visiting all the branches that they could. So I think there was a few of us, quite a number of us, because we did go on a little half-day's training to becoming a balance support officer, and there were other postmasters there. So we all got a little bit of training on doing that, and we all got a badge and sheets to fill in and that sort of thing. But yes, I think it should have gone on for longer. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Back to you, Mr. Norris.
And do you know if that was a regional initiative, or was it something that was around the country, as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware, it certainly was. I think like the head office where the retail line managers in my area worked from was in Bradford, Darley Street Post Office, which was a Crown office in Bradford. It definitely was, round and about in Yorkshire, sort of Keighley, Bradford and Leeds. I don't actually know about the rest of the country. I don't know.
Right. No reason you should. I just wondered. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Because as to Windsor, I hadn't heard of that role before.
We had 2 balance officers in our branch that went out in Somerset.
Right. Okay. So it was. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just say something about the training?
Can I just come back to you, Gary? Sorry, just 1 sec. So yeah. Can I just finish that? Sandy, so were they specifically coming out at the similar time to what Gary described when Horizon was rolled out?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they were 2 sub-postmasters. One was a sub-postmaster and one was a sub-postmaster that did relief work, and they had a little bit of extra training. They seemed to get their head around the system, and they went out and...
And to what extent was it explicitly because Horizon was new, or because Horizon was causing problems?
I think at the time it was because Horizon was new, and we had 1 or 2 more elderly sub-postmasters that just couldn't understand the computer system. Okay,
fair enough. Thank you. So, sorry, Gary. Yeah, you were going to say about training. I'll come back to you.
When I went for the interview, there was no exam. Now, I would have thought if anybody was going to take on a post office, they should have had some sort of examination, because I'm no good at maths. I never have been. And I mentioned this to the interviewer. I said, when will you let me know if I've got the office? And he said, oh, I'll let you know now you've got it. And I said, what, no exam? And he said, no. He said, all we're interested in is if you've got enough money to last 2 years in business, money behind you. I said, oh, fair enough. And I thought that was brilliant. I didn't have to take an exam. But what I think is that they don't take into account your experience. I'd never even opened a computer before. I had no technical experience. So I was always a manual worker. So why didn't they take into account different people's abilities? It's just throwing you in at the deep end and saying, get on with it. And that's how it was.
Right, okay. I'd like to sort of build on that then. I'm interested in how you're kind of monitored and managed by Post Office Limited then. And so we've talked about the account managers supporting you and so on, but let's talk about how they responded when you had shortfalls or discrepancies, apparent shortfall. What was just tell me about the process and what happened.
They weren't interested. I was not interested at all. More often than not, they just say you're not going to put money in. As I said earlier, Diana Hall said to me, if I call the auditors in and tell them there's a discrepancy, they'll just close you down. And that was the top and bottom of it.
Right, and when would that have been, sorry?
That'll have been mid-2000s, maybe a bit later.
Right, okay. So yeah, she was your area manager, was she?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she told you that. How did you feel then, and what did you do on the back of that advice?
Well, you've just got to keep putting the money in, which I did. Thousands of pounds worth of money, just to keep going.
Right. And how much of those payments that you made in did you ever declare or make the post office aware of in any way?
I would say about 4 or 5, and then they deducted it from my wages. That's after they told me I was the only one.
Yeah, so tell me about those conversations. I'm just interested in the actual process for you to doing those 4 or 5.
Yeah. Well, when you're short like that, we'd run out of money to put in, so that's when I started phoning the helpline up. So it was £1,000. They put you through to another department. I don't know which it was, and it was always a nice lady. And I'd say, am I the only one that's having problems like this? And you'd always get the answer saying, yeah. And it made you feel inadequate. It was a horrible feeling.
How many times do you think you asked that, Gary?
Say about 4 or 5 times.
Right. And it was also always to this extended phone line?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And then you would get a phone call back from your contracts manager, which mine was Andy Carpenter, and you went through everything with him, and he'd just say, there's somebody stealing. No, he said, I've been through this so many times, there's somebody stealing. I said, well, there's only me and my wife, and a lady what comes in now and again. Well, there's somebody taking it. And that was the answer.
Mm-hmm. Right. But so from what you're saying, you never moved to suspension or an investigation in a formal sense? No.
Only in 2014 at the last one. I never got suspended. I resigned. I was advised to resign.
Right. Okay. We'll come on to those in a sec then. So Sandy, just tell us a bit about this, about what the post office were doing to understand your losses, and either in a supportive way or in an investigatory way.
They didn't investigate anything. If you put it into the suspense account, you were agreeing to pay, quite honestly. But I didn't have too many large discrepancies anyway. We had one where a counter clerk had made an error. Can't remember the exact details, but it was quite a large sum of money. And we notified the helpline, got a reference number. And then about a week later, I got a phone call asking me if I was putting the money in. And I said, no, there's an error notice due out on this, and explained it all again. And then about a week later, the audit team turned up.
Right. Okay.
I explained to them the situation, gave them the reference numbers, told them what had happened. They checked the stock and cash, were quite happy and went away. So I never really had any major problems in that respect personally, but I met sub postmasters that did.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And Tim, you were saying you never really got to the stage of having an investigation or anything at all. It was all in-house, as it were, was it?
Not not as such. It was always made very clear to me that you'd got to put the money in. You just thought you'd made a mistake, or a member of staff has made a mistake. So you used to put it. You just used to put the money in. However, if I may tell you about one occasion where I arrived at my office, and it would be round and about October 2004, and an audit team was waiting there at 8:30. And so we got there, and they introduced themselves as audit team. I think there was 3 of them. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, well, you know, I've been audited before. Not too thing, just let them get on with it. Don't think they'll find anything wrong. So they got about halfway through the audit, and they counted enough for me to open. And I opened and started serving customers. And round and about 10:30, 2 gentlemen turned up who introduced themselves as security investigation. And I can remember it very vividly because my legs turned to jelly. And my first thought was, well, I know I've not done anything wrong. Maybe my staff have. Or maybe, I don't know. So they asked if they could come in. They came into the secure area, and they took me into a little back office and basically accused me of stealing £2,000. And they went on to explain that every week we used to send green gyros away. So somebody'd come in with a green gyro, and that figure could be, well, it could be for anything. It could be for a tenner, it could be for £350. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you used to pay that money out. And at the end of the week, you would bundle them all up and send them in a green and white striped pouch to Bootle, where they went back to the DWP. And so they explained that a pouch in August of 2004 had never got to Bootle. But the difference is that my weekly average green gyros amounted to £8,000. But on this particular week, they added up to 10. I'd claimed for 10. And so they straight out with they were extremely aggressive. They accused me, right, of stealing £2,000. They said that you'd ghosted the £2,000 of the dockets and thrown the whole pouch away. And to which I informed them, why on earth would I do that? What would be the point? £2,000? Yeah, it's a lot of money, but not worth, you know. And so they went on to explain that the average weekly number of pouches that never got to Bootle was 9 out of round and about 13 or 14,000 post offices. And I'd had one in March of that year. And what they explained is that lightning cannot strike the same place twice. To which I explained, well, actually it can. Because if you think about it, if there's 9 a week go missing, right? And it's just like putting your numbers on in the lottery every week. And so they were absolutely adamant. They turned the place upside down. They went through all my paperwork. I mean, the first thought is that probably I have not sent them off. And I'd put them in my weekly papers that you file away for 5 or 6 years. But the whole thing, they were aggressive and actually, and then another auditor turned up, and so there was 5 of them altogether, and they'd actually turned up mob-handed, and I believe to this day they turned up mob-handed to actually suspend me. And the whole thing was actually I mean, I'm a very different person now to what I was then. I was extremely traumatized, and traumatized for some point afterwards, because I thought, well, what would I done wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And all they were asking me to do, can you explain why it's 2,000 more than your weekly average? Why? And at the time, I couldn't. And it's one of them things. It came to me after they'd gone. I managed to persuade them that no, I've not stolen any money. But I did actually manage to realise why. In 2004, the then Chancellor Gordon Brown introduced a new something called pension credit, and pensioners who used to cash a Group 13 docket, their retirement pension, got this pension credit backdated, and it was paid in the form of green gyros. So that week and a few other weeks, I did pay extra money out, but I couldn't think of it at the time.
Right.
I did actually through some like informal channels. I think it turned out to be the pouch was being intercepted by a dishonest person on the way to Bootle. I don't really know exactly. It's just what somebody said, but the whole thing is, and the reason I want to share you this story is it's actually got nothing to do with Horizon, but everything to do with a culture that existed in Post Office Limited. They came that day, right, to suspend and which could have led to termination. And myself and my mother's investment in that business would have gone. And obviously in 2005, they did pay me compensation, but no suspended postmaster ever received any compensation. So I was very near, right, to losing my reputation, my livelihood, or whatever. And you've heard plenty of people who have. Mm-hmm. So I just felt that is a story that's very, very pertinent to the inquiry.
Right. Thank you. Right. So Gary, how does this compare with what you've been through? And do you want to sort of tell us the story of your, the progress and process of shortfalls and things?
Well, they just seem to be getting worse over time until 2014, when I recorded £16,000 going missing. But when the union rep turned up, it was 32,000 or thereabouts, not exactly.
Okay, so just take a step back. You did your balancing. Was this the end of a trading period? Was it at the end of the month?
Yeah.
So you had a £16,000 discrepancy.
Not in all one go. No.
Right. Okay.
I was audited in the September 2013, and it was £300 over. And from then, it just started building up, and I didn't declare it, the losses, with no money left. No money left at all to put in. So when it got to February 2014, when I did this £16,000, I thought, I can't do it anymore. I've just got to come clean.
Right.
I phoned my union rep up, then I said, can you come in? Okay.
And that was the local regional rep, was it? The
National Federation rep, yeah. It was in office about 5 miles away.
Right, okay. And just before what communications did you had with the post office before you called the Fed rep?
I didn't.
Right.
It was a complete waste of time. No, I had no faith in phoning the helpline up or anything. So I'd stopped phoning about a couple of years before.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So when it got to 16,000, were the Post Office Limited aware of that discrepancy?
No, I covered it with the adjusting the checks.
Okay, right. So tell us a little bit about the Fed rep conversation and where it went from there then, just so we can sort of understand what process happened.
I phoned him up on the Tuesday, and he came on the Saturday because he couldn't get away from the post office. And he came about 5 o'clock, I think, evening. And he checked all the money, and I think he said it was 32,000 short or thereabouts. And his answer to it was, he said, you're going to get the interrogation team and tell them that it's been stolen. You left the door open and somebody's been in the store like a fool. I mean, I were in that much of a state. I didn't have my mind. So, like a fool, I told the interrogators that under caution.
Can I just pause there one sec? So you rang the Fed rep on a Tuesday night or Tuesday.
Yeah.
And did you explain to him on that call that it was about 16,000 shortfall?
From what I can remember, yeah.
So what in a sentence or two, what was your state of mind between then and the Saturday?
Well, I'd had breakdown on the Tuesday when I phoned him. I just seemed to know the game were up and I couldn't falsify it anymore. And my wife came downstairs and she's going to have to go to the doctors. So I went to the doctor. He said, you're in the middle of a breakdown. When was the last time you slept? I can't remember. He gave me some sleeping tablets and some antidepressants. And I would away with the fair. I'd just gone completely.
Right.
So from Tuesday to Saturday, and after that, I mean, when he came, I was physically sick. When he confirmed the money had gone missing.
Right. So then, just so I'm clear, sorry, you went through the books or through the system for the 16, and then it appeared to be 32,000.
Yeah.
On that Saturday, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And who was this? So this was the local Fed rep, local or regional rep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Can't remember his name.
Right. So what were your feelings? And you said you're away with fairies, understandably. But tell me about the sort of processes, the thought processes, and the action that you took.
I just wasn't thinking. I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I was drinking that much as well. I was on bottles of whiskey a night, one bottle of whiskey a night, just to blank it all and get some sleep, along with a sleeping tablet. So my mind just wasn't there at all.
Mm-hmm. All right. So his advice to basically conceal it, or you lie about it, I guess. Did he give you other advice around that point about, what you should do in relation to the investigation, or what happened there?
No, he advised me to resign. He contacted the auditors to tell them to come in, which they did the following Tuesday. And then from then they took over, they closed me down. Right.
Okay. And you were open between then and the Tuesday, but
yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to tell you about the auditors?
Yeah. Can I just pause? Sandy, if we think about this in the terms of process, have you got things you want to say that kind of meet the same point in the journey that Gary's describing?
No, I'm just appalled at how the Federation dealt with it.
Okay, well, I'll come back to you in a sec on that then. So, Gary, if you want, keep telling us what happened then, Gary, if that's okay.
Yeah, the auditors came in on the Tuesday and they were fine. They were pleasant. And I got the feeling that they believed me. And excuse me, because I'm going to swear in the next couple of minutes. When they was leaving, one of them took me by the hand, both shook my hand, and one of them took me by the hand, and he looked round and he said, tear this fucking cage down, post office fucked, start selling something, but start making some money. And that's what the auditor said to me, and they wished me and my wife well. And I said to my wife, they believe that I hadn't done anything wrong. They seemed so friendly and nice, and I don't know, it just didn't seem right.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay. And then so what happened next from that?
Something else they said as well. I must have been looking really worried, and the one what said that turned to me and says, don't worry about it, you'll be laughing about this in 3 months' time. But I wasn't, and I'm still not laughing about it now.
No. So you were closed down on the Tuesday tell me that. So the auditors left.
On the Saturday, we never opened again after the Saturday, after the rep had been there.
Right. Oh, okay,
we tried to keep the shop running, but it was a waste of time.
Right. Okay. So tell us about what happened when the auditors left. What was the next event?
I've got some phone calls or a letter saying that I don't know what the correct name is for these interrogators. They wanted to interrogate me, but they didn't have anywhere to do it. So I invited them to my house in the spare bedroom, and that's where they did it. And I could bring a solicitor or a friend or whatever. So I plumped for the National Federation rep, a different one, from the Rotherham area, I believe. And he told me if they found me guilty, I'd be going to jail for 2 years. And within an hour,
The rep said that. Sorry.
the rep said that I'd be going to jail for 2 years. And within an hour, one of the interrogators, he said exactly the same to me, off record. He'd be going to jail for 2 years.
Okay. Right. And so what did happen next, Gary?
I was interviewed under caution.
Still in the spare bedroom?
In my spare bedroom. They said it lasted 63 minutes when I did the freedom of information, but it lasted far longer than that. I did the freedom of information to get the copy of the CD, which I didn't get. They said they would give me one and they didn't. But I never even got a CD from the post office. I got a heavily redacted transcript of it.
So what's your recollection of the process between them arriving in the bedroom and the caution, telling you you're under caution?
Well, before and after the interrogation, it was light-hearted. Not with me, because I didn't want any part of it. I would just kick myself out of the way. With the Federation rep, they were laughing and joking about football. And I thought there's something, I don't know, it just didn't seem right. And then when I was under caution, being given the interview, the rep tried to speak up, and I do apologise again. One of the interviewers shouted at him, pointed his finger and said, "And you can fucking shut up." He never spoke again, from what I can remember. I was just left by myself. It was a waste of time in being there.
Yeah. And can you remember specifically which sort of team or unit they were from, the investigators?
They were from Manchester somewhere, that area. Yeah. They were like good cop, bad cop. One were nice. And the other one were just accusing me all the time. What have you done with the money? You're guilty. And that sort of thing. And part of it, I wasn't feeling well. And they said, "Do you want to stop?" And I said, "No, keep going." So, but it lasted far longer than 63 minutes. And then the search of the house and garage and cars. He went through my wife's underwear drawer. It would just humiliating.
Right. And then the outcome of this was what? What happened next?
I resigned, or told to resign. I was advised by the union rep to sell my house to pay them back. He said, if you do that, it might stop you from going to jail and being prosecuted, going to jail. So we put our house on the market. We explained to the estate agent his position. The house was valued at £350,000 on business, and it eventually sold for £225,000. So I lost £125,000 like that. That's just so I didn't go to jail.
Yeah. So what was the? I'll come back to just finish off then. What was the legal process that you went through?
I didn't go through. No. I had a letter and a phone call from Andy Carpenter, and he said they weren't going to take it any further. So that was it. That was finished. But I was hounded and hounded. That was February until we moved out in July by phone calls from one of the investigators. Where's our money? And that's all they was bothered about. Where's our money? Even when we were changing contracts, I got a phone call. Have you changed contracts yet? Yes. Well, can we have his money straight away? I said, I'll send a check off tomorrow. and that were it.
Right. So you sold the house, you paid back the 32, was it, in that and all? Yeah. Okay. Right.
And which year was this, please?
2014.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And was that the end of that process then, effectively, from what you're saying? Was it?
Yes, that was it, finished. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sandy, can I come to you just to describe some of your process? Because you mentioned about the POID and the federation. Perhaps if I could give you a few minutes to, let's start as Gary was just talking about the investigation. Do you want to just tell us about your experiences and views on the POID then?
Yeah, sure. First of all, there's something I'd like to say that Sir Win may or may not understand, all right? Branch secretaries in the Federation were volunteers. We weren't trained. The most help we got was a little leaflet saying this is how to organise a meeting and give your local sub-postmasters some support. They didn't really explain what that meant. When I took the job on, I started doing what I assumed all the branch secretaries were doing, and that was I organised meetings, and if anyone had a problem, I dealt with it, whether it be going to help them check that their balance was right, and if a postmaster in our area ran into trouble, they knew to ring me straight away, and I used to tell them, make no comment to the auditors and let us know when the POID interview is. And I would attend that interview as a friend or as a Federation rep, but we were not allowed to say anything. We were there, we could be there to oversee what was going on, but we were quite categorically told we were not allowed to intervene. So I could only give my sub-postmaster advice before he went in and support when they came out. And I sat in on many an interview where it was extremely harassing. They were quite brutal at times, that's the word I'd use. I know they had a job to do, but on 2 different occasions, I actually stopped the interviews. I wasn't supposed to, because the sub-postmaster was in such distress. And I insisted that we had a break. I mean, they really were, it was good cop, bad cop, but they were quite nasty about it. So I want to mention that fact because a lot of the witnesses have said, oh, the Fed rep didn't say anything. I said we were not allowed to. If we had we were called to help with what's called an RTU, which was reasons to urge interview, reasons to urge to get the postmaster reinstated. That was normally with the contracts manager. The Federation representative could make representation to the contracts manager on behalf and, you know, supporting the sub-postmaster. And I did that on a number of occasions as well. So, you know, when I hear about these people that didn't seem to get the benefit of help from the Federation, it does annoy me, because at the time I was quite a proud member and I was a branch secretary for 16 years. And in all that time, I only had one case that I couldn't deal with, and that was because he got himself a solicitor. And if they did that, we weren't involved anymore. All the other cases I dealt with the post office and got on extremely well with most of those personnel. I seemed to have a rapport with them in the end. In fact, sometimes POID would phone me up and say, we're suspending this person this morning, maybe you'd like to contact them later. They'd tell me in advance what was going on. The one thing I did notice was the fact that there was no consistency from branch or area to area in the outcome of these suspensions. In one area, the sub-postmaster could be reinstated. In another area, they were booted out. And I could never understand why that happened. They could lose their job for £500 in one area, and in another area, they're being reinstated, although there was thousands of pounds supposedly missing. I could never understand that.
Mm-hmm. And which areas of the country were you the branch secretary in?
Most of Somerset. Most of Somerset.
Right.
But the other thing that I found annoying was the fact that, as I said, the branch secretaries didn't really get any training. The executive officers were supposed to help us. And to me, they were like an old boys club. I phone them up for advice and they go, oh, you know, tell them to ring the Samaritans. Oh, tell them we can't help them. And this I must tell you, I was at I think it was a Landudno conference, on my way in, and Alan Bates, with the JFSA now, was stood outside handing out leaflets. And as I went to take one, my executive officer walked by, and in a very loud voice, he said, "Sandy, don't take any notice of him, he's a thief." And that's how the executive of the Federation thought of people that were in trouble. The minute they were in trouble, they were guilty. And I never took that view. I took the view you were innocent until you were proved guilty. And I worked very hard to try and make these sub-postmasters, if they weren't reinstated, they'd have time to sell their office so they didn't lose their investment and things like that. But I feel so sorry that in other areas, the branch secretaries didn't do that as well.
So how often were you typically in contact with the executive officers, Sandy? Just sort of describe that communication process.
Well, I said they weren't much help. I had my very first case, a sub-postmaster phoned me up, and he was in a desperate situation, was talking about suicide. And I spent 40 minutes on the phone talking him out of it. And I put the phone down, walked back into our house where it's connected. And my husband said, "Are you all right?" And I burst into tears. I'd never had to experience anything like that. So I phoned out my executive officer for some advice. And he said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, tell him to phone the Samaritans or put the phone down on him." And I thought, well, that's not what an organisation that is supposed to be representing sub-postmasters is supposed to do, surely. And we didn't get any help from the executive. As far as I was concerned, they were a little like a old boys club.
Mhm.
No help.
You said that you were a branch secretary for 16 years.
Yeah.
Can I try and pin down the period we're talking about, from when until when?
1990
Yeah.
till about 2007, and then I became branch president.
And
So-
how long did you hold the position of branch president?
A couple of years till we sold the office. I took the presidency on so that I could help nurture the new secretary, but he was well up to it anyway. I was very lucky in my branch because my branch president was ex-police. So if we heard of a postmaster in trouble, we'd both go along and interview him ourselves. And we'd come away and say, "Well, what do you think?" And if we thought he was guilty, the best I could do was get him time to sell and let the post office deal with him. If I thought they were innocent, I'd fight the case.
And just one more question from me. You stressed that when you attended interviews under caution, you weren't allowed to say anything. Just tell me how that kind of instruction came about. Was that something said at the beginning of the interview by the investigators, or was that something that was just known throughout the business, so to speak?
I think it was known throughout the business, but to my knowledge, the first few I attended, it was funny enough, always the same interrogators. We would go in, sit down, and he'd look and say, "Well, you're here just to see fair play. You're not allowed to say anything."
Right.
And we'd have to give out, they'd start the tape and we'd give our names and who we were, and so it would roll.
And so far as you can remember, and please, if you can't, that's fine, at these formal interviews under caution, was anything ever said by the investigators about the right to legal representation?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Brocklehurst.
Okay. So, and it's your understanding that there were similar experiences for other branch secretaries? So, like when you went to conferences, did you sort of share these experiences with others and things?
Some of them were very good. They would do their very best to support the postmasters, but others just organised meetings. And if somebody, sub-postmaster phoned up who was in trouble, they'd say, "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" and put the phone down. I had a phone call from the one of the retail managers of the post office, and she said to me, "Sandy, we've had to suspend someone in Devon. I know it's not your area, but the branch secretary put the phone down on them. I'm not expecting you to do anything, but she might need a shoulder to cry on. Will you ring her?" So I rang this lady up, had a long chat with her. Cut a long story short, in the end, POID phoned me up and said, "We've got no lady investigators available on that day. Are you going to be representing this lady? And I went, yes, I'm coming down. They said, I will pick you up and drive you down then. So I said, fine. So I went down with them. They promised me lunch on the way back. Anyway, I had a chat with my lady before she went in. She admitted to nothing. When they came out, POID turned to each other and said, there's nothing we can prosecute this lady on. And we went, got in the car, and as I said, they promised me lunch on the way back. Well, his idea of lunch was a sandwich and a can of Coke from the local garage, because I think they were a bit annoyed, because he turned to me and said, was that lady really stupid, or was she well coached? And I didn't answer him. Because she had genuinely not done anything wrong.
So in the period after Horizon was introduced, was this a common experience for you as branch secretaries collectively to be dealing with Horizon issues?
Yeah, that and the training issues with Horizon and generally. I mean, I had another case where a new sub postmaster was closing at lunchtime on a Wednesday, and he was still trying to balance at midnight. So my husband and I went over and we showed them how to balance and how to use the system, which really the post office should have done in the first place.
Yeah.
When
you were ringing the executive officers up, were you telling, you mentioned earlier about calling executive officers for support or advice, were you telling them, there's a Horizon problem here or there or whatever, what were they reacting to? Executive officers were normally in attendance at our regional meetings, and these subjects came up and they just said, no, it's robust, nothing wrong with it. When would that have been, sorry?
They followed the same line as the post office all the way through. Nothing wrong with the system. Now, I understand why to a certain extent. Obviously, if the post office had admitted there was a problem, they might have risked losing clients if they thought there was bugs in the system. But at the same time, there were sub postmasters being prosecuted for things they hadn't done.
Okay. So I want to spend the last sort of half an hour just talking about the impact of all of this on all of you. But do you have any other sort of information you want to share with us about the processes you went through, the way that you were treated, or anything at all that Sir Win hasn't heard about the actual events?
If I can come in, is that okay?
Yeah. Yes, please.
The other sort of small story I'd like to say is it would have been round and about in 2017. That day I was serving on the counter. By this time I had 2 branches and I'd got a manager in each, and I was serving on the counter, and I served a young gentleman with a HGV license tax, and it was £1,800, and I did the transaction, and to the very best of my knowledge put the cheque in the drawer. He paid with a cheque. Now, at the end of the day, what you do is you process the cheque deposit envelopes, which are people putting cheques in the bank accounts, and also remit the cheques out to a processing centre and fill a batch control voucher in and send them off in an orange and white pouch, and they'd get there the next day and they'd do whatever. Now, on that particular day, what must have happened is I must have inadvertently sent the cheque to the post office without remitting it out and without a batch control voucher, because my member of staff the day after had run off a cheques listing, and there was a cheque there for £1,800 that obviously wasn't in the drawer. And so he asked me what I thought had happened, to which I can't remember. And then we sort of pieced it together. We rang the helpline, and the helpline advised that to just remit the figure of £1,800 out and your system will be right. And don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Because there was 1 or 2 scenarios that either by mistake given the cheque back, right, to the customer, or sent it off, like I've just stated. So thought nothing else of it until about 3 weeks later, I got a transaction correction wanting £1,800 from me. In other words, and at that point I was, gosh, that's going to be quite a large to put in, you know, because we always had to put money in. Now, as fortune would have it, later that day, that gentleman came in again to tax another lorry. They would obviously had, I think, a fleet of about 50 lorries. And I recognised his face, and I explained to him the story, and he said, no problem, come up, come and see me, Dad. He's very amenable. We'll see if we can sort it out. And sure enough, I went to see the gentleman, and he got out his bank statements, and sure enough, the cheque had been cashed. Right, the cheque had been cashed. So I came back and phoned the helpline up and told them this, and they said, well, you didn't send a batch control voucher off. We've no way of knowing. You still got to pay the £1,800. But the only way that you can get around this is if you go and get the cheque number, the sort code and account number. So I went back to this haulier, and he rather kindly took me down into the bank branch in Buxton, and we got a photocopy of the cheque. I came back to the post office and phoned the helpline up again and said, here, right, here's a cheque number, here's a sort code, here's the account number. And the reply was, yes, we did cash that cheque. And my reply was, well, why did you want another £1,800 from me then? And it was a case of, she laughed, right? Her first thing was she laughed. Well, you didn't remit it out and you didn't send a batch control voucher. So it's tough. But I said, you'd cashed it, you'd had the money. So the way I understand it works is the post office must have some form of client suspense accounts. And so in that particular one, right, it might be happen daily, it might happen weekly, it might happen monthly. The DVLA will know exactly how many tax discs were issued and how much the amount of money. And the post office will owe them an amount of money. Well, if they'd have had my £1,800 as well, that client suspense account would have been in surplus. So what would have happened to that money? Did it just sit there forever? Would it have just sat there forever? Or would it have found its way somewhere else, like Post Office Limited's profit and loss account? I to this day can't really understand why New Scotland Yard has not walked in Finsbury Dials and turned the place upside down. That is just my opinion, to be honest. And you know, I obviously I followed all this Horizon IT scandal all this time, and you know, I think a lot of the time that it's not a case of a loss. The money has been misappropriated. So for all intents and purposes, the money's somewhere else, not where it should be. But I was extremely fortunate to recognise the gentleman when he came in to tax another lorry. Because if I hadn't have done, right, I would have been £1,800 out of pocket, and that money would have sat somewhere in Post Office Limited for God knows how long. And well, I just don't know. That's something, you know, for me, the inquiry needs to ask that question of Post Office Limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Right. So, Gary, I'd like to come to you. Obviously, this is a human part of this is the human impact. And I'd just like you to describe, you talked before about the health problems that you were having at the time. I just wonder if you could tell us just a bit more about the impact all of this has had on you, and whether it's financial, personal, or whatever. Just tell us your feelings, please.
Well, we lost everything. We lost his home to start with, his business. My health is shot to pieces. I'm on that many tablets a day to keep me going is unbelievable. I'm still having panic attacks with it. 2 or 3 years ago, I found myself in local cemetery at 3 o'clock in the morning, just sat on a bench looking at the graves. I don't know how I got there. I don't even know how I got back, but I just remember being in the graveyard. And it's things like that. I mean, I've had Bell's palsy with it, all brought on by stress. 3 months of walking around with the eye closed and your mouth disfigured like Hunchback of Notre Dame was. So, yeah, I mean, and when your daughter looks you in the eyes and asks you not to kill yourself, that was the biggest one for me. But she didn't realise that about a month before I'd already tried.
What age was she then, sorry?
2012, so it should have been 25. 25 years old, yeah. So, yeah, it's just been awful. Both of my children went to university and we couldn't afford to give them money. We couldn't finance them through university, and that was so embarrassing and degrading. And they've never complained about it once, that's the thing. It's just been horrendous. I wish I'd never, ever set foot in a post office. It's been terrible.
And we're obviously talking about some of those serious impacts then, and from what you're saying, they still continue now. How would you sum up the changes that have happened to you?
What do you mean, mentally or physically?
Just everything, really, from how you were the person that you were describing at the start.
Well, I used to, when we first went in, I was 45 years old, so I want to spring kicking then. I used to work 12, 14 hours a day. And yeah, we're tired. It's long, but now I haven't worked since we left there. I can't work. I got up this morning and I thought to myself, hey, I don't feel bad. Only my knees are hurting. Within an hour, I was laid down again. Just, with condition what I've got. I just laid down and I didn't get up again off the settee until coming in here at just before 1 o'clock. It's just shocking. I mean, I don't even think they're interested in what damage they've caused the post office. Don't really. There's been nothing there at all.
So, and if I've understood you've not worked since you closed the post office?
No.
So what age would you have been then?
I was 58 when we closed. 58, yes. Yeah. So I'm 66 now, so this should be when we're enjoying ourselves, me and Maureen, but no.
You mentioned your daughter, and do you have a partner, a wife?
Yeah, Maureen, yeah.
How would you describe the impact that she's experienced?
Well, Maureen ended up on antidepressants as well, but we've been solid. We haven't argued about it, about what's happened or anything. We've been really, really solid. I can't fault her for it. She's been fantastic. I'm really proud of her.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
Okay.
So, Sandy, you were nodding in agreement to some of what Gary was saying. Do you want to tell us a bit about the impact that all of this has had on yourself?
Luckily, none whatsoever, to be honest. I mean, by the last 3 years of having the post office, I wanted to get out. I'd had enough. I wasn't happy with Horizon. I wasn't happy with the post office, to be quite honest. So it took us 3 years to sell it, but we managed to. The day we walked out of there, we decanted to a hotel and I sat and cried. I was so relieved to have got a shot of the post office, if you like. I don't think people realise that when they take on a contract, you're immediately under the thumb of the post office. You open the hours they want you to open, you transact what they want you to do. You're stuck with it. And it's not the sort of job where you can hand in your notice and leave after a month if you don't like it. You've got all your money tied up in it. So you've either got to make a go of it and make it work, or hang on and sell. I did over 20 years for the post office. If I had my time again, I wouldn't go near one. Absolutely wouldn't. We sold our house originally to buy a village shop, and then we took the post office on. We've never got our original investment back. Those houses are worth twice as much as the one we're living in now that we could afford to buy when we sold the last post office. our investment went down, even though the post office, the mains office I ran, I mean, I increased the remuneration from about 45,000 up to nearly 80. But when it came to sell it, we just didn't get the market value it was really worth. What with, they were right in the middle of network transformation, or whatever name they gave it. And we had to wait to get a letter from the post office to say they were confirming that we weren't a branch that was closing. And we had to wait for that. But, you know, I wouldn't want another post office ever again. And I had to say, I've actually recommended people not take them on.
Right. Thank you, Sandy. So, Tim, how would you sum up sort of all or any of the impacts that these events have had on you then? Changed in you?
You'd have to split it into two, really. There's obviously, you've talked about the human impact, and the other aspect is looking at it from a business person's point of view. From a human impact, right? Day to day, week to week, year to year, it's an arduous task running a post office, right? Arduous. It's harrowing. It's you are in a constant battle. You're in a constant state of alertness that something might happen, and that can be, you know, through customers, or it could be the post office, because nothing's ever easy with the post office. So a simple task, what you would think is a simple task can seem just beyond the post office comprehension. And I'll give you a little example. What something that's happened this very week. They have changed all the banking screens on the user interface on the Horizon system in the last fortnight. Now, as you'll know, the icons, it's a touch screen and there's icons, but in the bottom corner of each icon is a 2-digit number, and some users choose to use those numbers. Instead, they use the keyboard. So I'll give you this example of what's happened this week. The withdrawal icon used to be number 42. So my counter clerk has always pressed number 42, it's a withdrawal. Guess what they've changed it to, right? The icon, yes, is in a different place, but icon number 42 is now deposit. So a customer came in this week, right, and asked, can I withdraw £600, please? So reverting back from years and years of using Horizon, the counter clerk has pressed number 42, £600, and must have actually done it twice, because that's one thing that they have improved. For a deposit, you have to confirm it twice. And mistakenly put £600 into this lady's account instead of withdrawing it. Now, we realised the mistake at the time, and this lady said, well, it's your mistake. We rang with the counter clerk's phoned the helpline, and I gather everything will be sorted. But it very much depends on the honesty, right, of that customer. Because I think the post office writes to the bank, and then the bank writes to the customer, and the customer has to give permission for that £600 to be taken back out. If they're not honest, there's very little I can do about it. Now, only the post office, right, could make that kind of error. That just shows a complete lack of understanding of what it's like to actually serve on a post office counter. And I'll bet, I mean, I've not heard of it yet, I'll bet there's lots of mistakes being made at this while we speak for that very, very reason. And that is how it is. That's how it's been for years and years and years. Looking at the other aspect from a business person's point of view, I 7 years ago started a little microbrewery, and I'm now actually bought a little micropub as well. And I'm starting to think along the lines that, do I want myself and my business and my limited company and my family having anything to do with the post office? its reputation, right? It must have gone right down with all this, what's going on. To be successful and continue to be successful in business, do I want to be associated with the post office anymore? I'm sure it'll come. It won't just be yet, but that's from a business person's point of view. Does the post office have any future? Going back to the human impact, right? If you look at everything closely, right? Everybody that's ever owned a post office, certainly in the 24 years that I've owned one, right? We're all victims for the very, very simple reason that we've not enjoyed the post office that should have and could have been. So we're all victims. And I know there's a massive variation in some of the people that have actually, been prosecuted, etc. But sure enough, we're all victims because we've all had to suffer in one form or another, because the post office has not been the organisation it should have and could have been.
Mr. Boothman, can I ask you while it's on my mind, and I apologise to Jerome if he was about to ask it, but you, of course, are still currently a sub-postmaster.
Yes.
And there have been many public statements made by very senior post office personnel to the effect that they really do wish to improve the relationship between the post office and sub-postmasters. And those statements have been made, obviously, particularly in the light of the ending of the litigation. What's your experience of the last 2 or 3 years in terms of general relationships with the post office?
Right, that's a very good question. Could be about 3 years ago, they reintroduced area managers. So every single post office, regardless whether really a small post office or a large post office, has been given an area manager. And I have to say the two that I've had have been brilliant, and I've never heard a wrong word about any of the other 90 others, neither. So that has been a very, very, very positive step. But do I think a leopard can change its spots? No. What I actually think has happened is that the post office has moved the spots and it's hiding them. It comes forward and says that it wants to reset the relationship. I actually did ask Nick Reed, what do you mean by resetting the relationship? What relationship are you trying to reset? And his exact words were, there wasn't one. And the way that I see it is they are making all the right noises and they like people to perceive that they've totally changed. But actually, right, if you dig down deep enough, they have not changed at all. There's like a hierarchical structure within, the higher end of Post Office Limited that actually, no. I as I've stated, as a businessman and a contract holder with them, you would be extremely foolish to ever trust them again. For what things that's happened to me and other postmasters. So there's plenty of evidence that they'll suggest, and yes, little bits of things has improved, like a dispute button when it comes to balancing and this, that, and the other. But actually, what's the post office's plan for the next 5 years? What do they actually intend to do? Are they being as transparent as they should be? Probably not. As I've stated, that my mother gave me a substantial amount of money to buy my first post office, and I feel very lucky that sort of investment's still intact as we speak. But whether I'll ever see that money again, could I ever sell this post office? that would be a bit of a different story. I think I'd struggle to actually sell it. So I'm open-minded, but I think that the inquiry should look at actually dig deeper. There's an awful amount of rhetoric out there, and it's like a hazy cloud. It's speculation. The newspapers are full of it. There's loads of things on Facebook and Twitter and all that. And I just think that actually what the inquiry needs to do is it needs to really dig deep and dig really down to find out actually what's actually happened, and what the Post Office and government's intent for the network is going forward.
Thank you.
Gary, just before we finish, I wonder, you're probably aware that Sir Win is going to be talking with the key players in his events. I wonder, what would you be asking him to ask them, or what?
The post office.
Post office, the government, whoever, Fujitsu, individual, whoever.
The culprits. I'd ask Sir Win to get the truth out of them. Why they did it. I think we know why they did it, but why did they punish us like they did for no reason? It's heartbreaking. How many people's been affected by it? Not just the 555, but the hundreds and hundreds of people and the communities as well. What they've had the post office closed down because of it. I'm sure Sir Win's going to get to the bottom of it because he seems a very trusted man. And I just hope he can do it. Just ask him some delving questions, which I know he's going to do. And I'd like to say thank you to Sir Win for all he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gary. Sandy, have you got any questions that you would like Sir Win to raise on your behalf?
I would like to know what the post office did with the surpluses that were in the suspense account, because I was told at one stage it was quite a large amount of money. Now, after they balanced all their clients' complications and sorted that out, there must have been a substantial amount of money sat in there, because sub-postmasters were paying in 30,000 here and there. What happened to that money? Did it go into the post office's bottom line profit, or what? But I'd like to know what happened to that. I'd also, to a certain extent, like to say that I think it would be very nice if the post office and the government finally gave the sub-postmasters a reasonable amount of compensation. What I wouldn't want to see is lawyers and accountants arguing for years about how much they give someone because their husband killed themselves, and how much do you give somebody if they lost their house, and how much do you give them because they lost their job 10 years ago. I think across the board, the compensation should be a reasonable amount of money, X amount to each one of them. End of story. So we can put a closure on it. These people are desperate. They need the money now, and that's got to be sorted. And as for the post office person, I think I can understand why they did what they did. I would like to know whose instructions, and if they came from the top, where post office personnel were told to tell sub-postmasters, you're the only one. That must have come from somewhere. And that's it, really. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Sandy. Well, we are coming to the end of our time. Do any of you have any other final things you'd like to bring to Sir Win's attention before we pass back to him? Anything you haven't been able to say that you wanted to?
Can I just say, just in reply to Sandra and Gary, just following on, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I think if you were to straw poll the vast majority of postmasters, I think that's the answer you would get. People just want to know what actually happened.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Sounds like a good time to hand back to Sir Wyn, but I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon and for your openness. And it's been a privilege to hear what you've had to say. Thank you. So I'll pass back to you, Sir Wyn.
Well, obviously, the first thing I must do is to thank the three of you for participating in this afternoon session. We've now done a number of focus group hearings, as they're called, and each one of them has been extremely informative in their way, and this one has been no exception, because in each one of them I learned things that I didn't know, and that is really the reason why we're holding them. So a big thanks from me. Some of the things you've said to me, all three of you, haven't been said to me before. And you may know that many people have made witness statements about their experiences. I stress that I'm not going to compel any of you to make a witness statement if you don't want to. But it may be that in the course of the coming weeks, members either of the Secretariat or my legal team will contact you and ask you whether you're prepared to make witness statements about some of the things you've told me about. And if that does happen, I'd be very grateful if you give that careful consideration. But I repeat, nobody's going to force you to do it. Only do it if you want to do it. So on that note, and with my repeated thanks, we'll bring this session to an end. And I wish you all a good afternoon. So bye from me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.